Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 3 is the season most fans point to as the season where the show really gets good. With fan favorite arcs like the Camino arc, the Mortis arc, and the Citadel arc, it's no surprise that this season is such a fan favorite. But if we take a look at the entire 22 episode season, is it really that much of an improvement from Season 2? This is part 3 of a 7-part video series where I go through all the seasons of the Clone Wars and discuss the many aspects of them. From the characters to the arcs, to the creators, to the production, I'm gonna cover as much as I can. Because even after the series concluded back in 2020, there is still so much to discuss. If you haven't already, I'd highly recommend checking out parts 1 and 2 of this video series where I go through the first 2 seasons of the Clone Wars. But if you're all caught up, let's travel back in time to 2010 and look at the production of Season 3 of the Clone Wars. At this point, with the crew behind the Clone Wars, the team was pretty much solidified with their process. Season 1 was the season where the team learned the in and outs. Season 2 was using what they learned and taking it to the next level. So with all that experience, Season 3 was the season to really experiment with out-of-the-box ideas. The big theme of this season from Dave Filoni was wanting to try new things.
That's what Star Wars should be. You know, we shouldn't just be doing what we've seen before.
Now, trying new things is pretty vague. Where this does apply, however, is with the types of conflicts this season explores. Season 1 was mostly about separatist versus Republic battles. Season 2 had some of that, but it's still largely centered around what the Jedi and the Republic were up to. Season 3's conflicts are all over the place. And I mean this in a good way because this show is an anthology series. Season 3, way more than the previous 2 seasons, really takes advantage of what it means to be an anthology series. Of course, we have some standard Republic vs Separatist episodes like the ARC Troopers episode, and of course we have the standard Jedi missions like the Citadel arc. But in Season 3, we now have arcs about the Hutt crime syndicate and how they are affecting the war. We spend 3 episodes focused on the Night Sisters and Asajj Ventress's quest for revenge against the Sith. We have entire episodes devoted to political corruption and how these banking clans are undermining democracy. We have 2 episodes about Trandoshans kidnapping people and hunting them for sport. And most notably, we have 3 episodes devoted to exploring the Force and who these gods are. When I heard Filoni say he wanted to try new things, this is what I thought about. In the behind the scenes featurettes, there's a lot less focus on the limitations the team had. Now that most of the crew had been working there for 3 to 4 years, it was almost as if there was nothing left to struggle with other than thinking of new ideas. The animation this season has gone to the point where it pretty much doesn't get better until Season 7. And again, I mean that in a good way because said animation is top notch this season. One part of the animation that struck out to me this season was the emphasis on cinematography. The first 2 seasons certainly saw improvement on the animation front, but there was never a focus on cinematography. In Season 3, so many of these locations are beautiful to the eyes. Dathomir with its red hues and neon colored water stands out as a highlight.
All throughout this arc, we really broke new ground on how to light. By having all this naughty little twigs and branches, we're able to always have shadow over the characters or have those branches act as a really nice backdrop.
It was the shot with the commandos walking off the transport where I noticed this show had taken that next step. Certain imagery during the Mortis arc remains iconic to this day. The planet of the Citadel made the entire arc so much more visually interesting. Felucia in the beginning of the Padawan Lost episode was another location that took me by surprise. It wasn't just the shot selection or the locations that were beautiful, however. The team put an emphasis on small little things like rooms within the Hutt Palace looking significantly better. During my discussion of Season 2, I pointed out how the animation team added so many minor details that brought life to the screen. Season 3, however, blows Season 2 out of the water. The one that instantly comes to mind was the effect of the invisible Night Sisters. Keep in mind, I'm putting this in perspective of how the show had improved up until that point, and how animation looked in 2010. The effect with the Night Sisters was supposedly a really simple effect for the animation team, but yet it was still something the team behind the Clone Wars had not done yet.
I went in Photoshop, came up with how to do it in 3 steps, and the studio totally got it from that Photoshop file. I have that snapshot on my computer, and it just always just reminds me that it can just be that simple.
During this same arc, I couldn't stop noticing the detail of half of Savage's face being all beaten up. In season 2, the animators spoke about the challenges of creating lava during the Mustafar episode. Here during the Citadel episode, it looks leagues better. An aspect of the animation that I have not spoken about at all yet is the choreography. The fights in the early seasons of the show feel blocky. They're nowhere near as smooth as the fights we saw in the movies. But comparing season 3 to season 1, it's, again, another noticeable improvement. The Night Sister episodes with Savage stood out to me in particular, especially with how brutal Savage was. The animators captured that perfectly. Now there's another topic I have yet to discuss during my discussion of the series, and it's a pretty big topic I cannot ignore anymore, and that's the chronology of these episodes. The Clone Wars is infamous for having a good chunk of its early episodes out of order. You can go to StarWars.com and see an official list of all the episodes in chronological order. With seasons 1 and 2, it's mostly in the right order, but season 3 is where it all goes to whack. Episode 1 and episode 3 actually take place fairly early in the series, even before most season 1 episodes. There's a stretch of episodes midway through the season that are all out of whack. In some instances, the shift in the chronology works, but in most instances it doesn't. The strongest example of this working would be with the Domino Squad. People loved the episode Rookies from season 1, so Lucas thought of the idea to explore the training of this team and how they ended up on the Rishi moon. So going back in time to show us how Fives and Echo came to be, and then in the next episode showing them in the present, was an effective way to shift the chronology. When the first episode began, we knew this was a flashback episode and we understood its purpose. An example where it didn't work was with the whole Cad Bane and Zero the Hutt arc. So we all remember the season 1 finale of Cad Bane rescuing Zero. When we get to season 3 episode 8 Evil Plans, it turns out we are seeing the origins of how Cad Bane got the plans to the Republic Senate Chamber, and this episode involved R2 and 3PO wandering about. Then the next episode after this shows a follow-up on Zero going back into Hutt space. I remember talking to a friend who was watching the Clone Wars for the first time, and he got so confused by this whole arc. It seems strange to mess with the chronology of this show to elaborate on this plotline of all things. I couldn't find an explanation online why Filoni or Lucas were so open with the chronology. That's it with the discussion of season 3. So how good was season 3 actually? Well, let's dive deep into the 22 episodes and see how they all hold up 13 years later. I spoke before about how Filoni wanted to try new things, and while that can mean new animations or new and creative conflicts, the real meaning behind this has to do with expanding the scope of this war. Again, the first 2 seasons mostly just focused on the Republic and the Jedi. Season 3 expands this scope significantly. We get more development of the Republic and how they're not just the good guys, we get real development for the Separatists for the first time, and we meet so many new factions that are independent of the 2 main factions.
Starts to round out this idea that there is a much bigger, broader world going on in Star Wars than just what you knew.
Let's look at the Republic and the Separatists first. With the Republic, this season really highlights how corrupt this government was. I'll talk about the corruption in a bit, but what we get throughout a lot of these Padme episodes expands our understanding of the Republic in ways that the prequel films could only dream of. You would never know how influential the banking clans were to the Republic until this season. The introduction of Tarkin was a really smart way to add some moral complexity to the Republic. We know Tarkin as the evil dude from A New Hope, so to see him on the good guys while maintaining a bit of that sinister personality leaves the audience questioning who they should root for. It's the earliest bit of foreshadowing that the Republic becomes the Empire, and it was a reminder that the Empire was more than just Palpatine declaring himself Emperor. The reason people like Tarkin gained such favor with Palpatine was because Palpatine knew they would be a great fit in his new empire. It was subtle but effective. Season 3 was also the first time we got a true look at the Separatists. My biggest issue with season 1 was the comically evil villains. That season had nothing to do with exploring people who were sick of the Republic corruption and wanted to secede. This episode not only squashes those issues I had, but it does so by literally taking us to the heart of the Confederacy. Maybe it's just because we only get one scene of the Separatists, but their democracy seems a lot more functional than the Republic's. Showing real Separatists and not the comically evil villains like Locke Durd is something that takes this show to the next level for me, especially as a big Star Wars fan. Let's look at the Hutt Syndicate. We've seen a good amount from the Hutts here and there. They were referenced quite a bit in the original trilogy, they were kinda present in The Phantom Menace, and we'd seen Jabba in the Clone Wars movie, but this arc with the Hutts was the first time that we truly learned how big this syndicate was. For one, there are a multitude of different Hutts, and I don't just mean Jabba's son or Zero. There's an entire Hutt council where decisions are made, and I love how all the Hutts look different too. We explore Nal Hutta, the homeworld of the Hutts, and we see a bit of how they operate. The other out there groups of people we learned about were the Night Sisters. There was a lot more effective world building here than with the Hutts. We understand a fair amount of their society. They're a matriarchal system that uses men as weapons more than anything. The lore and the magic of what the Night Sisters can do and how it contrasts with the Force was certainly intriguing. These Night Sisters are a leagues better example of a witch coven compared to what we saw in The Acolyte. In that show, it was just a bunch of women talking about the Force in a unique way. Here we have a whole different species of women, and their magic is vastly different from the Force. As a viewer, it's more interesting to see these new cultures and species compared to the ordinary women who hide in the mountain and use the Force. It's also interesting how what was established here is still being carried out in the Ahsoka series. Thrawn is trying to build an army of zombies, and I'm curious to see where that goes and how it connects to this arc. The other big part of the Night Sister arc this season was the Sith. You don't know how much I enjoyed seeing Sith training. We had never gotten a hint of this elsewhere. I know there are some examples in the books that are quite good, but I'm talking about stuff that's on the screen. It was a major missed opportunity for the sequels to not explore Kylo and Snoke's training after Snoke said, "It's time to complete your training" at the end of The Force Awakens. I've always wondered how a Sith master would recruit their apprentice too. The Sith are a really secret order. You don't want to just hand out flyers and hope people sign up. So seeing the process of Dooku going to the Night Sisters for potential candidates was the world building I love to see. For this arc, it was a big focus to mirror Savage's training to Luke's training from The Empire Strikes Back. And that was a great way to highlight how different the Sith truly are from the Jedi.
Savage is just a brute force he's like a wrecking ball with a lightsaber. It's very much the anti-Luke training.
Fun fact, this entire arc was written by Katie Lucas, George Lucas's daughter. She did a great job in my opinion. I wouldn't say this group got much development, but the Trandoshans from the last two episodes were another unique faction to think about. People who commit crimes against humanity simply for sport. It's a dark take on the Star Wars universe to be sure, but again, one that expands our understanding of this universe. As cool as a lot of this stuff is, we can agree that anything that has to do with the Force is always the most interesting. This leads us to the Mortis arc. Here's a fun fact about what goes on behind the scenes. With all these interviews and featurettes, there are often entire 15-minute mini documentaries about these arcs. This is largely where I get my information about the production of each season, listening to what the creators focused on with each arc and finding patterns that match the seasons as a whole. But with the Mortis arc, and this is the only arc that this applies to, Filoni explicitly states that he doesn't want to talk about it much because the mystery here is so important.
We should really not answer directly a lot of the questions about Mortis. We have answers to those questions for sure, but if I answer directly what something is, I feel that I'll be robbing you of the purpose of that arc, which is to make you wonder. It's to make you challenge certain ideas, to ask questions.
I wish Lucas took this approach when he thought about explaining midichlorians. So much of what happens here is incredibly vague. What does Anakin being the chosen one really mean? What was the sun's end goal? Where did the gods come from? In most instances of world building, I don't like things being left to the imagination. Like if Lucas told me the Republic is corrupt and the proof is in your imagination, I really wouldn't like that. But when it comes to magic, especially a magic system like the Force, honestly the less I know the better. It goes without saying that 13 years later we are still asking these same questions, especially in regards to whatever Baylan is searching for. I love how seriously Filoni and the writers took this arc when it came to exploring the Force, because the lore of the Force really should be treated with the utmost respect. For example, there was an early scene in this arc where the son would make contact with Darth Bane and Darth Revan. As cool as that would have been, Filoni and Lucas realized including this just doesn't match the rules of the Force and the Sith, so ultimately the scenes were scrapped. Season 3 of the Clone Wars expanded this war and this universe as a whole far more than the first two seasons. Some of it was more interesting than others to be sure, but each and every one added something to this universe, and that's what an anthology series should do. So we've spoken about the world building of this season, let's now discuss the themes. Seasons 1 and 2 barely focused on the mature themes this show eventually became known for. Season 1 did a little bit, but not too much in depth. Season 2 decided to focus a lot more on character than it did theme. Season 3 mostly focuses on one theme, but it does so so exceptionally, and that's political corruption. There's even an episode just called Corruption. I want to go through the list of political violence we see in this season alone. Chairman Papanoida's daughters are captured by the Trade Federation in an effort to quell the resistance to their blockade. The Prime Minister of Mandalore seeks to overthrow the Duchess so he can continue his dealings with the black market. In order to stop a vote for peace talks and paint said peace talks as an attempt to weaken the Republic, there is a bombing of the energy plant that forces the Senate to continue the war. The banking clan attempts to assassinate multiple senators that oppose the war because if the war keeps going, then the banks keep profiting. And then to wrap it all up, there's an attempt to kidnap King Katuko, but he gets his neck snapped in the process. This moment felt like a message from the writers. Do you guys remember that goofy looking Toydarian from the first episode when the show was so innocent? Yeah, we're gonna have his neck brutally snapped by a Sith in training. This season goes all out on how dirty this war really was. All these conflicts are so much more interesting than Lock Durd creating a super weapon or Nuvo Vindi creating a virus capable of mass genocide. Now, of course, political violence isn't the only way to show corruption. I like the scenes of Ahsoka teaching the Mandalorian kids about corruption. The irony of the Jedi teaching about the dangers of corruption was not lost on me. Also, taking the time to show us how these corporations influence politics was a much more effective way of showing corruption compared to the multitude of political violence we saw. I do want to levy one criticism towards the politics of the Clone Wars, however, and that's how it portrays the status of the war. At this point in the series, we've seen many different battles and many different political conflicts. Since our heroes win almost every time, you'd think that the Republic is winning the war, but according to Padme, this isn't the case. During the Mandalore episode, Padme says the war isn't going well for the Republic, and this is a sentiment that is repeated a few episodes later when the Senate votes on increasing clone production. The Clone Wars shows a lot of the Clone Wars, but it doesn't illustrate at all what the status of the war is. Who's winning? Who's losing? What do all these battles actually lead to? Maybe I'm asking too much of a show that, again, is for kids, but the show and especially this season tackles so many mature themes and topics. I don't think it would be a big ask to have the writers paint a better picture of the war effort. In the episode Pursuit of Peace, Padme talks to one of her aides about how the aide's family is struggling during the war. Padme then tells the Senate that these people don't have any electricity or food. It would have been much more interesting to actually see the people and how they're struggling, like how we saw the people of Ryloth struggling in season 1, but instead we are only told how the people are struggling, not shown. So even though the exploration of political violence and corruption was excellent, there could have been a much better job at illustrating the state of the war. Let's wrap up this discussion of season 3 by looking at the characters. Padme is not a character who I've spoken about much, so let's dive into her. The thing is, Padme was a character I was never fond of. She was okay in The Phantom Menace, but she always felt like a repeat of Leia. The differences in personality between the two are minimal. Come the Clone Wars, Padme is often treated as this person with the perfect morality. She's always on the right side of these conflicts and appears to not have any flaws. Her morality is admirable, I suppose, but it doesn't make her that interesting to watch. The only flaw that I can think of was that she married an immature 19-year-old in Attack of the Clones. Now, while I may not care for her character, the arcs she is often the focus of are mostly interesting. Through her, we get an exploration of the inner workings of Mandalore. We get to see true separatists for the first time through her. The political corruption Padme tries to expose are some of the best episodes of this season, and we get to learn a lot about other characters when they're around her, like Anakin or Ahsoka. So while I'll always be disappointed that the mother of Luke Skywalker was never the most interesting character, I can at least say her character is still a vehicle for interesting storytelling. Now, a character that absolutely flourishes this season is Ahsoka. Each season has continued to develop this character, and this season takes that development to the next level. I was so happy that the writers didn't just keep throwing Ahsoka in similar situations as the first two seasons and make us think it's growth. A theme of season 3 I have emphasized so heavily is widening the scope of the war. So when it comes to Ahsoka, the writers want to widen her view of the war as well as widening her view of what it means to become a Jedi. A big focus for Ahsoka this season is becoming more independent from Anakin. She is often put in situations where she needs to lead and figure things out without her master. Her first significant episode this season is episode 6, The Academy, where she is is brought to Mandalore to teach Mandalorian kids about corruption. And when some of these kids come to her for help, she then has to lead these kids in stopping that corruption. This was a situation that we had not seen Ahsoka in before. During the Ryloth arc in season 1, Ahsoka was certainly uncomfortable being in a position of authority, and that was only brief. Having her be comfortable with it here shows the progression of her character. The better example of this is the final arc of the season where she gets captured by the Trandoshans. I love how the story makes it a point that Anakin cannot come help her, and that if she's going to escape, she has to figure it out on her own. It is Ahsoka who brings hope to these hopeless kids and ends up leading the plan to set themselves free. Filoni definitely knew at this point what his endgame was with Ahsoka, and that was her leading a siege on Mandalore and surviving Order 66. In order for us to believe that can happen, he needs to show Ahsoka learning how to become a leader, and he absolutely does that in season 3. Now, while these are examples of her thriving in positions of leadership, she's not always comfortable with it. In the episode Assassin, Ahsoka struggles to interpret her visions about Padme's assassination attempts. Anakin is not present for most of the episode, so she is forced to figure out her visions largely on her own. There's this great scene between Ahsoka and Padme where Ahsoka expresses her insecurities about this, and Padme helps give her confidence. This is how you develop a character properly. You tell the audience you want said character to develop a trait. You then show us where that character excels, but also show us where their insecurities are and what their flaws are. Then through the character learning about their flaws, they improve and develop said characteristics. That's what Ahsoka goes through in season 3. It certainly isn't a coincidence that after this moment in season 3, she gets her first major outfit change of the series. Outfit changes are often an indicator of change in Star Wars, and with Ahsoka, it shows us how she is maturing. So Ahsoka absolutely succeeds in a lot of her goals this season, but it's arguable she struggles more often than she succeeds. When she's helping the Mandalorian kids, her initial plan fails and she's forced to adapt. When she's protecting Padme, she makes mistakes a few times before she's able to successfully thwart that assassination attempt. During the Citadel arc, it was her impulsiveness and insecurity about being left out that led her to join the mission, and during said mission she was unprepared, which led to some hiccups. And during the final arc of the season, it was her arrogance in herself that led to her initial capture. During the episode where she and Padme go to Raxus, Ahsoka struggles with understanding the complexities of the war she's fighting in. When she asks questions to Mina Bonteri, she comes across as someone who frankly doesn't know what she's talking about. I thought it was such a brilliant idea to foil her with Lux in this episode. For one, the two are absolutely cute together, but also Filoni wants Ahsoka to get to the point where she willingly walks away from the Jedi Order, then he needs Ahsoka to realize the faults within the Jedi and the Republic. So this episode doesn't do much, but it does plant those seeds in Ahsoka's mind that not everything is black and white. When I spoke about Ahsoka during my discussion of season 2, I talked about how admirable Ahsoka's ability to endure was. Season 3 applies that same concept not just Ahsoka's physical challenges, but the mental challenges as well. When it comes to Anakin, a big focus for him this season was how much alike he and Ahsoka are becoming. Ahsoka improvises a lot this season, like her master. She doesn't listen to orders, like her master. And the most glaring example of this was when Ahsoka said she was able to survive because of Anakin's training. This moment here was probably the highlight of the season. No moment brought these two closer to me than Ahsoka saying the only reason she was able to survive was because of everything her master taught her. Moments like this make Anakin's fall to the dark side that much more tragic, and that is always a good thing. We get some development for Ventress this season. Sure, we get to see her past and we see her wanting revenge against Dooku, but that's kind of it. The arc is a lot more interesting when it comes to developing the Night Sisters as a whole rather than just Ventress, but I still appreciate the writers developing her nonetheless. As I've said multiple times in this series, and as I'll continue to say, the most impressive feat the show accomplishes is developing the clones. Season 3 begins with us showing the Domino Squad and their struggles with becoming soldiers. Where these episodes really shine is with 99. He was the perfect character to introduce this season, even if it was for only 2 episodes. 99 is not just there to teach his brothers valuable lessons, but he's also there to provide a certain perspective that is easily lost.
I wanted you to feel how much he wanted so badly to be just like everybody else, when really his greatest asset was that because he wasn't like these soldiers, he could see things more clearly than the clones of the Domino Squad.
Since 99 can't fight like his brothers, he's left behind by the machine that created him. Filoni said a big reason he wanted to develop the clones so much was because he wanted kids to relate with them. In season 2, a big reason he put so much emphasis on the individuality of the clones was because kids struggle with finding their own individuality growing up. And with 99, kids can absolutely relate with feeling left out because of something out of your control, or feeling like you don't belong at all. When 99 sacrifices himself to help his brothers out, even in the most minuscule way, what a powerful message to send to your audience, that you can always belong, or that your differences are actually what makes you stronger. The scene where Heavy gives 99 his medal has to be one of the most heartwarming scenes in the entire show. Certified tearjerker. Each season the clones usually get only 2 or 3 episodes to shine, and in these seasons so far, these episodes absolutely take advantage of that time. Season 3, in almost every regard, is more mature than its predecessors, and I don't just mean because it's darker. The season tackles more mature conflicts, it puts our characters in more mature situations, and the themes it explores are significantly more mature. I think without a doubt season 3 is the best of the first 3 seasons. But what do most people think? Let's go to the ratings and see what they have to say. Season 3 actually managed to get a 100% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, but only from 5 reviews. It did, however, get a 93% score from audiences, a 7% jump from Season 2. IMDb doesn't give individual scores for the seasons, but if you were to average the 22 episodes from Season 3, you would get a score of roughly 7.8 out of 10, which would put it above Season 1 and Season 2's average ratings. The highest rated episode according to IMDb was Witches of the Mist with an 8.9 out of 10, and the lowest rated episode was Evil Plans with a 6.2 out of 10. Tune back in a couple days to see my breakdown of Season 4. But until then, thank you everybody so much for watching another one of my videos. Don't forget to hit the Clot Squad, and I will see you guys next time.